When you're creating a video game, there are so many balls flying around, it's like your mum gargling sacks at a juggling performance, and therefore it is very easy for dumb mistakes to be made along the way, which actually end up diminishing the experience for players of the final product. Dumb mistakes like me using my one per list in the opening sentence, therefore ruining any tease later down the line, or, I don't know, allowing Peter Molyneux anywhere near a microphone when promoting a game. Yet, with deadlines and deals with devilish publishers, sometimes you've just got to plow on and hope that the end result won't be tarnished too much. Well, unfortunately for the entries on this list, that wasn't the case, and the games that I'm about to detail were derailed by one glaringly bad decision. So let's point and laugh together, shall we? As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games ruined by one dumb decision. Number 10. The inclusion of loot boxes. Star Wars Battlefront 2. After EA's 2015 Star Wars Battlefront reboot proved to be an entertaining yet relatively shallow content-like multiplayer shooter, the publisher promised that their 2017 follow-up would remedy this, releasing not only with a single-player campaign but also ditching a season pass in favour of free periodic DLC. It was almost too good to be true, right? Well, that's because it was. The decision to link progression in the multiplayer to loot boxes has made EA one of the most despised publishers of its time, with Star Wars Battlefront 2 being held aloft as an example of video game gambling which gathered so much heat that it became a talking point in country law classification discussions. With mounting pressure from critics, a widely mocked PR response which became the most downvoted comment in Reddit history, and a share price plummet for the company, EA decided to unplug microtransactions from the title before launch. However, the damage had already been done. What should have been a do-over for its piecemeal predecessor was now a sheer laughingstock, and insider reports of Disney wanting to take the license off them didn't help matters. Without this practice, fans could have forgiven the somewhat mediocre single-player campaign, but considering that loot boxes were such an inherent part of the multiplayer gameplay loop, it basically ruined everything worthwhile in the game, which is a shame because when you play it, it's actually still pretty fun. Number 9. The impossibly difficult tutorial, Driver. It's almost sad to think about how few people actually got to experience the utterly amazing Driver on the PS1 thanks to this damn tutorial level. I know that it's almost become a meme at this point, but it's true that this introduction to the game was easily its hardest point. Magazines at the time even noticed it, so it's not just a younger generation complaining about it today. The experience is made all the more difficult by the fact that the requirements to pass are just 1 or 2 word descriptions, and I actually got told by some fans on Twitter when I brought this up before that it was thanks to this game that people learned what the word slalom meant. That's weird. It was a major design flaw in a game that never really gets this difficult again, and I know it sounds like some hyperbole, but some people didn't return to this title after this tutorial experience, so yes, it literally was ruined for them, which sucks because it's actually a great game. Number 8. Releasing before it was finished. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain is one of the greatest video game experiences from a purely gameplay perspective, but its narrative is so intensely, haphazardly executed that it pretty much sours the playtime. To call it ruined might seem a little harsh, but it's the one aspect of the title that fans really rallied against. Even Scott was far less enthusiastic about it, and he absolutely loves this series. Yet maybe it's not the game's fault, and actually just an example of the fractured relationship between Kojima and Konami, who wanted less of the hour-long cutscenes of yesteryear and more emergent gameplay, and for the game to ship earlier as they felt it was dragging on too long in production. This resulted in Metal Gear Solid 5 basically being released before it actually been completed, and it shows. The story just drops off, and a planned 3rd chapter where Snake battles Eli on an island that he's taken command of was completely scrapped. Again, from a purely technical and mechanical perspective, Metal Gear Solid 5 is a virtually peerless open-world sandbox game. But with the story feeling so egregiously incomplete, it removes much incentive to ever go back. Number 7. Samus's characterization, Metroid Other M. Despite 2010's Metroid sequel prequel Other M providing a ripe opportunity to explore protagonist Samus's shadowy past, the game provided an inside look into a character that was, to put it bluntly, insulting. Samus's signature self-assuredness is cast aside, almost entirely rewriting her as more of a meek, obnoxious, and even downright unlikable young woman. Why anyone in as recent a time as 2010 would dare to take one of gaming's preeminent badass heroines and make her appear so weak, so timid, and so thoroughly dependent on men is a mystery for the ages, and one of Nintendo's rare mishandlings of a first-party game. While the gameplay might have been of a high quality, it's clear that the writers of Samus's character didn't have as high an opinion of her, and as such, we get a game that stinks of implications that we'd rather move on from. Number 6. Outsourcing boss battles to another studio. Deus Ex Human Revolution. Deus Ex Human Revolution seemed primed to be a major return to form for the franchise. After all, it had all the right parts: fantastic graphics, a focus on story, and a wonderful franchise that still had a huge following. And then came the boss fights. Oh dear. Now, I want to be clear about this because the reason why there was such a sudden drop in quality in these areas is because these were actually programmed by a little-known team called Grip Entertainment rather than Eidos Montreal. And yet, the blame really lies with no one other than the publisher, who forced this game to hit deadlines by sending out these rather important aspects of the game to another company. Fan responses were universally negative, as many had used builds dedicated to stealth and speech rather than fighting, and then were suddenly hit with huge difficulty spikes when it came to tank-like enemies. Eventually, a director's cut of the game came out which severely nerfed the difficulty of these encounters, but by then, the damage was already done, with many walking away from the title annoyed by the experience and seeing the game overall as a downgrade on the franchise. Number 5. Trico is a total pain in the ass. The Last Guardian. The Last Guardian was unquestionably one of this generation's most anticipated video games, being the follow-up to the utter masterpiece that was Shadow of the Colossus. The game had also been in development for nearly a decade, making it an almost mythical property for the gaming industry. And though the game is unquestionably an artistic, ambitious triumph in many areas, best of all aesthetically and emotionally, it's also immensely frustrating because of its awkward controls, AI, and camera design, which went against the player all the time when trying to manipulate your gigantic pet dog cat bird hybrid, Trico. In fact, trying to get Trico to do anything you want is like battling with the same thing inside us all that tells us that we need to go out and socialise when all we want to do is sit around in our pants and play XCOM 2. I will do it eventually, but it will be a fight the entire way. Now, some will argue that this lack of control makes Trico more realistic as an animal, but even so, I doubt that these same people were being so high and mighty when plummeting to their deaths over and over thanks to this hairy bellend not doing what you asked. Number 4. The atrocious matchmaking system. Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint. The recently released Ghost Recon Breakpoint is not a good game, and yet its generic mission structure and pathetically lazy story could have been forgiven if the central multiplayer looter-shooter loop were much fun at all. And though there is plenty of potential for a Division 2-esque reinvention of the Ghost Recon franchise, Breakpoint's promise is totally derailed by an abominably awful matchmaking system. All Breakpoint had to do was just repeat a formula that the Division 2 had already set up, yet instead, it bafflingly didn't even include the ability to matchmake for specific story missions, instead randomly throwing you into whatever mission your party leader is currently up to. This hilariously results in players being able to effectively beat the game within literal minutes of co-op play opening up, whether they wanted to or not. It's an embarrassing, bizarre oversight and the game's true unforgivable misstep, because it totally obliterates any chance of you finding longevity with this title. Number 3. The pick-a-color ending Mass Effect 3. I don't want to talk about this anymore. We all know how maddening it was to reach the end of Mass Effect 3 and be hit with this choose-a-color ending, to have our entire 100-plus hour story just end with something that seemed thrown together at the last minute, and it is genuinely painful to think that someone thought that this was a good way to cap off this story. A PR firestorm quickly ensued once the game was released, with fans demanding that BioWare air quotes fix the ending, which did actually result in a DLC update which did expand upon the climax, but still left many unsatisfied. It was a truly depressing end to an otherwise incredible sci-fi RPG franchise, and permanently dented many fans' love for the series, so much so that when Andromeda came rolling around, it had a lot to live up to, which, it didn't. Number 2, The Auction House, Diablo 3. As hype as Diablo fans were for the series' first game in over a decade, Diablo 3 was released in 2012 to immediate controversy when, in addition to the presence of an always-online DRM, the game's auction house allowed players to purchase loot with real money. Though initially conceived as an attempt to reduce risky third-party buying and selling of in-game items, allowing trading with physical cash cheapened the overall experience for many players, who felt that allowing people to pay their way to a sweet loadout was dangerously close to pay-to-win territory. As anyone who's played these games knows, it's part of the fun to grind for, years to unlock rare loot, so just being able to buy it removes most of the actual meaning from the game. Less than 2 years after Diablo 3's release though, Blizzard eventually binned the auction house. But this was a choice made way too late in the day, as those lapsed fans weren't showing any interest in coming back out to play. Here's hoping that future installments learn from this grievous mistake. And number 1, Chapter 13, Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15 was one of the most avidly anticipated games of the last 5 years, and though it did boast terrific visuals and a cast of truly likeable characters, it all kind of fell apart with the now infamous Chapter 13. Much has been said about this drawn-out and boring section of the game, and things reached such a fever pitch that the entire thing was reworked in a patch that was released long after the game launched. However, if you're unfamiliar with this exercise in patience and pain, Chapter 13 takes everything that made Final Fantasy 15 great, namely the open world and free-flowing combat, and flushed it down the bloody toilet, replacing it instead with linear corridors and combat that felt utterly repetitive. Oh, and also, it took nearly 3 hours to get to the end. Brilliant. The game's director went on record to state that this was kind of the point, that players were meant to feel as frustrated as Noctis, but surely they're sending a message and then they're sending gamers packing entirely. And as it stood for a while, Final Fantasy 15 had one of the lowest completion ratings for a video game of that year. And I know it's a long game, which obviously affects that statistic, but others attribute this low percentage to the fact that Chapter 13, it absolutely sucked. And there we go, those were 10 video games ruined by one dumb decision. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and please let me know down below what your picks for this list might have been, because I might do a commenters edition further down the line. But before we go, I just want to say one thing, and it is on the subject of dumb decisions, and that is this: it is okay in your life to make dumb decisions every once in a while. It is okay to make mistakes. I cannot state that clearly enough. But this is the thing. It's about learning from your mistakes. It is about forgiving yourself, allowing yourself to grow as a person. If you go ahead in life afraid of taking risks because you're worried about failing, you will inhibit yourself. And if you need support in achieving your goals because you're not sure how to approach them and you're worried, remember, you can reach out and speak to people. Friends, family, professionals in the support industry. There are people out there who truly care about you. And remember, you are not alone. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. And if you'd like to do something else for me, then you can check out Live and Let's Dice. It's a board game channel that I now run outside of WhatCulture, and I just play with my friends. It's just a bit of a laugh, just a bit of relaxing fun for me. As always, you have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.